Hello, my friends. Whether you're trying to motivate an audience or learn more about how motivation works for yourself, you should know about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, as well as how those two types of motivation work together. And that's exactly what we're diving into in this video. So welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Devlin Peck and I help instructional designers learn new skills and land opportunities, which is why today we are talking about motivation once again. And it's really important that we know the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, because if we appeal to the wrong type of motivation at the wrong time, we can actually make our audiences feel less motivated than they were initially. So we don't want that to happen, which is why we're going to make sure you know the difference between these two types. So first up, what's motivation? Why, how are we talking about this? We can think about it as a person's willingness to move or act. So a person's willingness to engage in a specific activity, essentially. And it also can speak to the reasons why we engage in specific activities or behaviors. So if we can make people feel more motivated, we can make them feel more willing to do whatever it is that we need them to do on the job or in the world, in line with the learning goals that we've set. So first, let's take a look at extrinsic motivation. So when we're extrinsically motivated, we're doing something to get a reward or avoid a punishment. So you can think about this as like behaviorism, operant conditioning, if you're familiar with those terms. We're doing something so that we get something outside of ourselves. So the primary motivation for us doing that task comes from the external world. That's a good way to think about it. Extrinsic is external and intrinsic is internal. All right, so here's some examples. Completing a mandatory e-learning course so that you don't lose your job. So if you work in instructional design, or if you're holding any kind of job where you have to take computer-based training, you're probably familiar with these mandatory e-learning courses. And while it may not be as extreme as like losing a job, a supervisor, someone is probably going to be emailing you or messaging you every few days telling you have to get this course done. So if someone's doing it just to get someone off their back or to not lose their job, that's primarily extrinsic motivation. Doing a class assignment to avoid failing. So once again, these are both punishments. So if we fail the class, that's a punishment. So we're just doing what we need to do so that we don't get punished, essentially. Another example of this is working at a job you don't like for a paycheck. Doing the job isn't particularly satisfying or rewarding. We're only doing it so that we can get that external reward, which in this case is a paycheck. I'm sure you can think of many other examples, maybe even in your own life, of things you do that you don't really like doing, but you just do it because you want some external reward. Praise is another example of an external reward. If it's something coming from someone else, whether it's someone telling you good job or someone giving you a check for 10 grand, those are both examples of extrinsic motivators, essentially. Okay, so intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is when we do something because it's enjoyable and satisfying. So the primary reward when we're intrinsically motivated comes from within. So it's not from something outside of ourselves. It's an internal reward. And the process is essentially the reward. So when we're doing the thing and we're feeling the positive feelings, that's the positive reward in itself. It's not like, oh, I'll be happy when I get that $10,000 once I get that external thing. No, it's not like that. It's like when I'm doing this, when I'm engaging in this job or engaging in this activity, that is a reward in its own right. So those positive feelings when you're immersed in the activity that you're doing. So here's some examples. Recording YouTube videos. I like recording these videos because it's satisfying. And it does feel a little bit like work sometimes because I want to stay on a schedule. I want to make sure weeks aren't going by where I'm not posting. But most of the time it is rewarding, just going through the process and talking in the camera like this. Going on bike rides. This is another thing I started doing recently that I'm very, very intrinsically motivated. It just feels good going on the bike ride. Like it just puts me in a better mood. It makes me feel calmer after. And yeah, there are other benefits, like maybe, I guess healthier. I'm sure I could think of some sort of external benefit, but I'm not like riding my bike to like win some marathon, win some race and get some medals or something like that. I'm just doing it for myself, for the positive emotions that it evokes in me. Reading a book because you enjoy learning something new. So this is another thing I've been finding in my life. Like for years, I was only reading like nonfiction, kind of like business and branding and marketing books just because I'm like, well, if I'm going to be reading, I should do something that's going to like help the business, which is like externally motivating in a way. I mean, learning was helpful, but now I'm reading a lot of fiction books, which isn't, I do learn reading fiction. I'm rambling, but like reading like fiction for me is like very intrinsically motivating. I'm not reading it to like, do something better for the business or see some kind of like results. I'm just doing it because it makes me feel good. So I'm sure you can think of examples of intrinsically motivating things for you, I should say. Now, there's this comparison a lot, like intrinsic versus extrinsic. So first, right off the bat, one is not necessarily better than the other. Both of these have their place. And a lot of times we are both intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. When I am reading a business book, for example, I can feel good, like just learning something new and reading does feel good, but there's also that extrinsic component of maybe I'll do something different in my business and see more revenue or something like that. So most activities or a lot of activities, you will be able to see both of these pieces. I guess one thing you could ask yourself though is like, what is the primary driver for why I'm doing this or why my audience might be doing this? Is it primarily intrinsic or primarily extrinsic? Intrinsic motivation is, of course, more sustainable in the long run. If we're only doing things to get rewards, then those rewards are going to need to keep coming, because if they don't, we're probably not going to keep doing that thing. So intrinsic, obviously much more sustainable. If we can foster intrinsic motivation, we would want to do that. It is a bit trickier though, as you can imagine, because if someone doesn't enjoy doing the thing, they're probably not going to want to keep doing it. So, and you can't force people to like something. But extrinsic motivation can help spark intrinsic motivation. And this is really interesting because this is where extrinsic is so useful. So say I'm like, oh yeah, I have no interest in that activity. If someone's like, hey, I'll pay you 10 grand to engage in this activity, maybe I'll be like, okay, sure, I'll give it a try. And then if they're like, hey, I'll pay you 10 grand to do it again, maybe after I do it a couple of times, I start to say, hey, this is pretty rewarding. Like I enjoy this thing. I could see myself doing this more often. So if you use extrinsic rewards essentially to give that little like burst of motivation or to get someone to start engaging in an activity, they may become intrinsically motivated afterwards. And 10 grand is a little excessive. It doesn't need to be that much, but that's just an example. You use it as a little spark to get people going, and then they may find that their intrinsic motivation grows. So again, particularly useful when people aren't very interested in the task or activity. But if they don't already like it, if they actively dislike it, it's probably not going to make much of a difference. You can use it to encourage someone to complete a very specific task, though. A good example here are like surveys. So when you do something for a brand or whatnot, and they're like, hey, if you complete this survey, we'll give you like a $10 gift card or a $25 gift card or a chance to win a $50 gift card, whatever it is. That's something very specific, and it can be helpful there. It's like, if you do this very specific thing for us, we will reward you for it, or we'll possibly reward you for it. Now, if you send out another survey and they're not offering any kind of monetary reward, they're probably not going to get as good of a response rate unless someone found, wow, I really love giving feedback and filling out surveys after that first one. So that you could see how that extrinsic could lead to intrinsic for some people. But if people come to expect that reward and then it's not there, if they're not intrinsically motivated already, they're probably not going to do what it is that they need to do. This is another interesting way to use extrinsic motivation. You can use extrinsic motivation to praise people's accomplishments, and this in turn can increase intrinsic motivation. So let me see. I'm meant to provide feedback on performance via a reward, as long as it's not too regular or expected. So these external rewards can be a source of like motivation. And it can even help people feel more intrinsically motivated, especially if they were already intrinsically motivated. So if I'm like really enjoying reading, for example, and I'm like logging it in some kind of app, which I am, I guess I'm imagining if they sent me some kind of like badge or something like, oh, you read 100 books this year, like go you're great. I guess that could help me feel more intrinsically motivated. It's like, oh, cool, I'm getting like recognized in some way, but still the primary reason I'm doing it is because it's intrinsically motivating. All right, so there are some risks associated with extrinsic motivation. So if people already have intrinsic motivation, excessive rewards could lead to the over-justification effect. which essentially decreases intrinsic motivation because we focus more on the reward and less on the satisfaction. So going forward with this example, say every 5 books or so that I log in this app, if they're sending me like $500 cash and they're like, keep reading, you're doing great, here's $500. I'll be like, oh, great. Wow. They recognize that I'm reading. I won $500. Maybe I read another 5 books and then I get another $500. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, it's nice getting this money. I guess I got to read another 5 books so I can get another $500. I want these checks to keep coming. And you can see how that shift would happen where originally I was reading because it was, I enjoyed it for myself. But now because these rewards keep getting piled on me, now I'm kind of like, wait, am I reading because I actually like it, or am I reading because I feel that pressure to get more cash or to get more, insert any reward that people might start attributing meaning to? And there's a lot of research on this. There has been for decades. One of the discussions around it that I thought was interesting is one of the theories on why this happens is that people like kind of question their own motivations, and if they feel like their motivations are kind of like sullied, so to speak, then they're not as intrinsically motivated anymore. So it's like in that example, I'm like, wait, why am I reading these books? Oh, is it for the money? Oh, if it is, I don't really want to do that as much. Maybe I'll do something else that's not related to, that doesn't feel like work. So that's a key part of it too. Like, if we're and that's such a common example too. Like, oh yeah, like artists, like I love painting or whatever. And then maybe I blow up on TikTok and now everyone's commissioning me for these paintings. And now I have to do 10 of them and it just feels way too much like work and I kind of lose my enjoyment. So there's a lot of examples that you probably have like used yourself before where things start feeling like work. It's that over justification effect at play most likely. It was initially intrinsically motivating, but then once those rewards started getting piled on, it started to become too extrinsically motivating and people became less intrinsically motivated. Lots of big words. All right. So this is an interesting study too. It's about West Point. It followed people at West Point from when they first joined to when they graduated. And this is like the Army prep school to prep people to become officers in the U.S. Army. So they survey incoming cadets to discover their motivations. And this study included 10,000 of these respondents over 14 years. So they ask, why are you interested? I think there are questions like, or people kind of rate each of these motivations. It's like, oh, my parents wanted me to go, or like, I want to be a great officer. And like, there's all these different kind of statements. Some of them are marked as like intrinsic motivators and some are marked as like extrinsic motivators. That's the main idea here. So here are some quotes from this article I read. Cadets with primarily internal motives were about 20% more likely to make it through West Point than the average. I noticed that primarily keyword there. So it's not like, oh, these people are only intrinsically motivated. Of course, there are extrinsic motivators too, but it's like, which end are we weighted to? Are we primarily intrinsically motivated? If so, then that's a very good indicator of success. And then if achieving a goal strikes you as having many benefits beyond the goal itself, but you care too much about those added benefits, you are more likely to fail. So if you're watching this because you want to become an instructional designer and you're just like learning more about, as much as you can about the field, if you're like, I want to become an instructional designer because I want that sweet, sweet paycheck, I want to make that $85K a year average or whatever it is. If that's all you're focused on, you're like, I could care less about doing the actual work. I don't care about the title. I just want a nice chill office job making that cash. You may be more likely to give up on your journey or get more frustrated or move on to something else. Maybe that pays a bit better. Or that's like easier to get into than if you were like, oh, I really want to be a learning professional. I want to help other people learn. That's really important to me. Of course, the external rewards will be great, but people who are more internally motivated may be more likely to succeed. And if you want to check this out, if you want to learn more about this, PowerPoint only. Science.org, the name of this article is One Type of Motivation May Be Key to Success. So you could check that out. I'll link it in the description too. Interesting read there. So, of course, we want to learn how to foster intrinsic motivation if we're designing learning experiences or even within ourselves. But primarily if we're designing experiences for others, here's what we can do. We can present a challenge with an uncertain outcome. A good example for me, like why I think biking is so intrinsically motivating for me. I'm like, I'm just going to try to bike to this spot downtown that we've driven to. I want to see if I can get there on my bike without like mapping it or anything. So like that exploration and that like maybe I'll get there, maybe I won't. That's really motivating for me because it is more like exploratory. There's not like there's not a guaranteed reward at the end of it. Like the journey is the reward essentially. So as instructional designers, we can of course design challenges like this. And we could do a whole video about like fostering intrinsic motivation, but this will just be to get us started. We can also provide opportunities to cooperate and help others. So for our learners, for our audience, we want to let them be able to cooperate with other people because helping other people can be very intrinsically motivating. So I had a video about this. I think it was like somewhat controversial, but about like how the field is a little crowded. So other people who are trying to become instructional designers, they could help other people around them become instructional designers too, and that in turn will like help themselves. And it was interesting seeing this. It helps me put it more into words. Like it could be very motivating for you, helping people around you, which in turn can help you stand out more in the market and see more success yourself. So interesting seeing how that plays into this. You can also provide opportunities to compete so that people can see how they stand. And then we can do an entire video about competition and learning as well. But it's interesting seeing this in the research. It is, people might want to be able to, if they are competitive by nature, they may want to say, how do I stand against others in this thing? Am I doing okay? I could see how that could be intrinsically motivating if they could see their standing kind of improving as they put in effort. But I'm sure that is more nuanced. So avoid that one if you're not going to do further research, maybe, because that one is more nuanced. Spark curiosity about the subject or activity, of course. So curiosity, if we just want to learn for the sake of learning, if we want to find out more for the sake of finding out more without any external reward, that's very intrinsically motivating. And this is something that we as designers can very much influence. We can definitely help spark people's curiosity. And then, like we mentioned earlier, we can offer praise for people's effort and progress. So we can offer this recognition or praise, which is a form of external. Yeah, it's something external to people, but if we use it in the right way at the right times, it can increase intrinsic motivation, as long as people's primary reason for doing that thing isn't to get praised or get the recognition. So this comes from some research from Lepper and Malone. So this is, I think there were like multiple articles and book chapters and possibly books in the 1980s. So check that out. Google Lepper and Malone if you want to learn more about how to foster that intrinsic motivation. My next step for you, if you would like to apply motivation design to your next project, is to check out the ARCS model. So this is the ARCS model by John Keller. It's very practical, especially if you're doing instructional design work and designing learning experiences. It's a very practical approach to tell you what to include in your learning experience to help foster this motivation. So check out the ARCS model. If you have any other questions or thoughts about this, drop a comment below, and I will see you in the next video.